Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great, man. The Giants have their upcoming second preseason game. They'll be going against the Houston-Texans, and we'll finally see Daniel Jones play. If you guys remember on Monday's episode, I got into a little bit of a passionate rant about how annoyed I was over the fact that Daniel Jones didn't play in preseason week 1. So preseason week 2, almost here. Excited to see these Giants starters take the field.
Absolutely. Jets on the practice field right now down in Carolina, so we'll keep you covered with live updates from that. More on the Jets and Carolina Panthers matchup in the second half of the episode, but wanted to kind of get things going with some storylines from both these teams first. And the New York Giants make a trade late last night, so figured we would start there with Phillips being traded away.
Yeah, so the Giants pull off a trade in the division, which was pretty surprising, trading Jordan Phillips to the Dallas Cowboys. And I'll highlight two kind of key talking points with this trade. Number one, we've had a lot of conversations about how thin the Giants' interior defensive line is. So it's a little puzzling that they were willing to sacrifice one of their defensive tackles this early on into the preseason. But the other thing that I'll highlight is this player was probably going to be cut by the end of the preseason. So getting a draft pick for him is a major win. Even if it is just pennies, it's a 6th-round pick. The Giants ended up doing a pick swap here. They traded Jordan Phillips and a 7th-round pick to the Cowboys for a 6th-round pick. But that extra 6th-round pick, who knows? That could always turn into something. Maybe it gets traded for something else. You know, the Giants threw a back-end 5th-round pick into that Brian Burns trade to sweeten the pot for that and make that deal get done. So adding those extra late round picks is always great. And because this is a player who's going to be cut, I do like the deal, but I do think that it really highlights that the Giants may be a little bit more confident in that DT2 position than myself and a lot of the other fans who clearly have a cause for concern there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be interesting how this ends up playing out on the Giants' interior defensive line, because you obviously have Dexter Lawrence, who is going to be playing on the interior. But besides that, like Raheem Nunez-Roche is in there, Jordan Riley, Timmy Horn. Is there anyone from that crop of guys who's really standing out to you as the leader in the clubhouse for that role?
Right now, I really like undrafted rookie Elijah Chapman out of SMU. And I like him in the sense where he's shown potential and he's flashed his talents. I don't like him in the sense where I feel so confident that he can be the starting defensive lineman alongside Dexter Lawrence. And the reason being, he's shown a lot of pass rushing potential. He had 5 total pressures in that week 1 matchup and a sack, 4 hurries. Like, he was all over the place as a pass rusher, looked really good. Didn't necessarily stand out against the run. And that's kind of expected because he's rather undersized. I think he's 6 foot, 280-ish pounds. So he's not a 300-plus pound defensive lineman like you would want him to be. And the Giants honestly do need a 300-plus pound defensive lineman alongside Dexter Lawrence, who could just kind of hold down the fort in the run game. I don't think they have that. So as much as I like Chapman, and I think he might end up stealing that starting job as an undrafted rookie, he still doesn't necessarily solve all of the Giants' needs on the interior defensive line. And then you're talking about maybe doing a little bit of a rotation there with him, Jordan Riley, 7th-round pick from last year, who I think is more of a nose tackle than just an interior defender. So I also have questions as to how he would fit. And then, like you mentioned, Raheem Nunez-Roche, who is a veteran. He's a decent player, but he's nothing to write home about. So I like Chapman, but again, just cause for concern there and all over the place on that D-line.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. I think you got to be excited about, what this edge room could look like with, Thibodeau and Burns, but it seems a little bit up in the air, like some of the more interior rushers on this team. Chapman as a UDFA, I think is intriguing and someone we have to keep a close eye on, and maybe is a conversation better left for when we preview the upcoming game for the Giants. But for me, I think it's like this is the opportunity for these guys to stand out in the preseason games, and I know the Giant starters are going to play a little bit in this upcoming game, but this is also where guys can separate themselves on the depth chart and maybe earn that starting job.
Yeah, and that's what I think could happen here with Elijah Chapman. I mean, when we entered the summer with this undrafted free agent, we heard some things about him in the spring, really standing out, showing his athleticism. We're like, okay, maybe there's a little gem here. Maybe he sneaks his way onto the final roster. But then in that preseason week 1 matchup, like I said, 5 pressures and a sack looked really good. If he does that again, if he has another sack this upcoming Saturday, if he has a few more pressures, I mean, he really could end up not only stealing a roster spot, but stealing a starting position for the Giants, which would be just fantastic if an undrafted free agent rookie could end up doing something like that. But he still has to compete. I mean, there's other guys in here. Ryder Anderson has been with the team on their practice squad a few years. Again, Jordan Riley has really flashed some things in run defense over the past 2 years. DJ Davidson played a pretty significant amount of snaps last year. He's still on the roster. And then Rakeem Nunez-Roche. So I think this is one of those positions that gets sorted out during the preseason, but I also would not rule out the possibility of the Giants picking up an interior defender on the waiver wire at the end of the preseason.
Well, good news. I think the Jets, if you want to pick from the crosstown rival, they're going to be having to make some tough decisions on the defensive line. I mean, if you just want to, you did it once a couple years ago with my guy Jason Pinnock. I'm still salty about it, but we might get another one, whether it's Leonard Taylor, someone that you saw obviously closely down there at Miami, or Tanzel Smart, somebody along those lines. And I think they're players who are capable of being on a 53-man roster. Just from the Jet side of things, it's a tough one to fit all those guys on there. So maybe that's something to keep an eye on, picking from the Jets here on the crosstown rival side.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to do that. Like you mentioned, Jason Pinnock, we took him. We took Jets former legend Lawrence Cager, who hasn't necessarily panned out so well with the New York Giants. But if we could take Leonard Taylor and have another undrafted player who's got a lot of talent and potential and just continue to develop those guys, I mean, yeah, send him my way. I'll take any of those defensive linemen over with the New York Jets just because I know that they've been well coached by a really good staff on the defensive side of the ball for the Jets. And there are some really good players there who are absolutely going to be released, even though they'd make the Giants roster at the end of the day if it was a little bit different.
Absolutely. So, yeah, just a surprise move in a way that they trade Phillips in division. But as you mentioned, like a veteran, if he's not going to make the team here with the Giants, you kind of do right by the player and get him in a spot where he could potentially have a opportunity to make the team, and you get an asset in return. And I get it. Some people say, well, what can you possibly get in the 6th round? That's just a late round dart throw. You never know. You could package picks together to move up in a draft. You could trade it for an already established player, like you mentioned with Brian Burns. So to me, I think this was good roster management by Joe Schoen, but still I would say some question marks at the position that aren't yet answered, but we should know in a couple weeks here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, I think this whole preseason is just going to be where they sort out things like this. Giants have not only on the defensive line, but at safety, they just cut Jalen Mills today, and they added a couple of other veteran players who are going to be on the back end of the roster. I think they're still trying to pinpoint what they want that depth chart to look like on the back end there, on the front line at DT2, and of course, CB2 is something that we've talked about endlessly, and we'll probably discuss in a little while once we talk about the upcoming preseason matchup. But these final 2 games, I think, are going to be really important for the Giants coaching staff as they determine who's in, who's out. And I think, again, on that defensive line, it's wide open for the taking. Anyone who thinks that Rakeem Nunez-Roche has this job locked down is kidding themselves. This is definitely an open position battle.
Absolutely. Let's get into something that you kind of sneaky predicted on the last episode. You mentioned Haason Reddick and a trade, and then the Jets, the next day or later that day, even on Monday, we got the news that Haason Reddick's camp asked for a trade. Now, Joe Douglas was then very quick to put out a statement essentially saying that's not going to happen, and that he needs to show up to camp and be with his teammates and that whole thing. But one, good on you for calling that Haason Reddick is going to play the please trade me card. But honestly, Anthony, this is just it's getting a little bit frustrating, a little bit more frustrating. And I don't know when this ends. And it just feels like it's getting uglier and uglier by the passing day.
Yeah, it really is. I'm going to pat myself on the back, take credit for the fact that I mentioned the idea of Haason Reddick potentially being traded. That doesn't mean I'm happy about it. This is ugly. This is not what you want to see. And it's just a really unfortunate situation here for both sides. I mean, clearly Haason Reddick had different expectations when he was traded to the Jets. The Jets had different expectations when they brought him in, and now they're just not able to come to some sort of an agreement or compromise. It's not what you want to see. It does remind me of what the Giants had going on with Darius Slayton earlier in the offseason, but it's a little bit different. This is a much more higher profile player who's looking for a lot more money than Darius Slayton would ever ask for. So it's just not the same thing. With Reddick, you really need to try and make this guy happy if you want to keep him. But at the end of the day, if he's just unwilling to compromise, I actually could see a trade end up happening here for the Jets. It just would not be something that we would be too happy about.
Yeah, it's the debate now that we've got from Jets fans, and clearly the Jets beat has been putting this out there, and it feels like they're kind of being used as a mouthpiece for the organization. But they're kind of saying that like Joe Douglas is in the right, and while I agree that I'm not giving Haason Reddick a long-term deal, I do think that Douglas has been a little stubborn on it. And I think in the past, he's been a little bit of stubborn in contract negotiations in years gone by. But saying that Reddick is a luxury on this team, I think that's almost a little disrespectful in a way to Haason Reddick's impact on this defense. I get it. He wasn't here last year, and the Jets had a really good defense, one of the three best in the league. But they also, that unit had Bryce Huff and John Franklin Myers, and both those guys are gone. And if Haason Reddick's not here, then suddenly you're looking at like Michael Clemens as a starting edge rusher for you, which if you're trying to be an elite defense and win a Super Bowl, I don't think that's the biggest path to success. That's not to say that they can't still be a solid unit, but I think clearly with Haason Reddick, they are an elite unit. And I think that's how this team is built. And they do need an edge rusher like that.
Yeah, I totally do agree with you. I don't think that Haason Reddick is in any sense of the word a luxury item for the Jets. If they had retained Bryce Huff and brought in Haason Reddick, then sure, I think you can classify him as a luxury. But losing Bryce Huff, it was almost one player out, another player in. That felt like a replacement here with Haason Reddick. And now with both of them out potentially, you don't really have that full replacement. And now you're going to rely on much less proven commodities to step up and compete. I don't know if that means we see more from Will McDonald or whoever it might end up being, but I don't know. I don't think that it's fair to classify that move as a luxury addition. I think that Haason Reddick's honestly very important to the success of this team. And, obviously we haven't seen him play for the team just yet, but when you're looking at this roster on paper, we've talked all off season long about how it is one of the best rosters in the NFL on paper. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they had such a stacked pass rushing unit that was headlined by Haason Reddick. So it's tough to imagine classifying him as a luxury addition and not a necessity addition.
First State Jets is hanging with us, says Reddick needs to realize we traded for his contract 3 for 45, 15 a year. We offered a raise allegedly out of goodwill. Nothing in CBA can force us to offer him anything. Best he is getting. The only pushback that I would give on that is the reason why Haason Reddick went for a third-round pick in a draft 2 years or 3 years ahead at the time in 2026 was because the assumption was that everyone knew Haason Reddick needed a new contract. I think a comparable that gets brought up a lot for him is Daniil Hunter, who just got a 2-year deal right around $50 million with well in the $40+ million guaranteed range. So I think if the Jets could be in a spot where they guarantee some more money this year and tack on another year for 2025. That's essentially a pseudo 2-year deal, even though you're getting him, you're redoing the 1 year that he had left, and they have cap space to do that. And then tacking on one more, and you're not really having to pay him into 2026, which is when guys like Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson in that 2022 class is going to start making some big money.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you have big paydays on the way, it's kind of tough to balance all of that stuff. And that's kind of like the curse. I mentioned this recently on one of my Fireside Giants live streams. It's a curse for the Dallas Cowboys. Like, they've drafted too well. Now they can't afford to pay Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, and everyone else that they have. That happens sometimes, and it's happening to the Jets, which is a good and a bad thing. Like we've discussed in their cornerback room, how they're going to have to make sacrifices there as well and probably let some players go. It's going to happen. And unfortunately for Haason Reddick, the Jets are more aware of the fact that they have a really good in-house talent that's still rising and developing. Meanwhile, Reddick is an out-of-house talent that they brought in who's only rising in age, not necessarily talent. I think he's kind of maxed out his potential here. So paying him long-term, I've always been against that. I've been saying that all offseason long. I would not cave if I was Joe Douglas. If anything, I probably would pull the trigger on a trade before I handed Haason Reddick the long-term deal. As necessary as I think he is to this defensive lineup, as important as I think he would be to the success of this team, I would probably rather just cut my losses very early on in the situation than get forced into giving him a long-term contract and watching him inevitably, due to his age, not live up to the expectations of that massive payday that he would receive. So I think that you make a really good point bringing up the future contracts that the Jets have to hand out. They're far more important than locking in Haason Reddick on a long-term deal.
No, absolutely. And that's obviously going to be a key for this Jets team and for Joe Douglas. A year from now, all those guys are eligible for extensions after, finishing their first 3 years in the league. And it's going to be really interesting how that ends up playing out. But again, on the Haason Reddick front, it's like, I just think from how the fans are reacting, it's getting ugly there. You have people picking sides and going against the player. And while I understand the frustration that the fans have against Haason Reddick, and some of it's justified, right now my biggest concern is if they do get something done before the season, which is obviously a good thing that he's, if something happens, he's not going to miss actual games. I'm starting to worry about when's the soft tissue injury going to come because he's not in shape yet, and like a pulled hamstring, a strained like something along those lines is making me a little bit nervous because, again, as I stated, the Jets defense really does need an edge rusher of this caliber. And then if he gets in here and is not in game shape yet and gets hurt, then that kind of just makes things worse.
It does, and that's always a concern when you have players holding out and not practicing. How can they be ready for the regular season? Like, as great of a player and as much of a veteran and experienced player as Haason Reddick is, I don't know. I still don't expect him or anybody to take an entire summer and spring off of football and then just step in and be 100% ready to go. I think that you're now looking at probably a 4-week period where Haason Reddick needs to get himself into game shape during the regular season. So basically his preseason is at the start of the regular season. And that ultimately is not what you want to see. You don't want your players sluggish out of the gate and struggling to get up to speed and get into game shape during the regular season. This is the time for him to be practicing, getting himself conditioned and ready to go. So not having him out there on the practice field, it's a concern for that. Maybe it leads to an injury down the line for him. But I also think it's just made things tough for this Jet staff, because you think about the way that they might want to play their defense and align certain players all over the place. They haven't really been able to craft what they want in their game plan because they're missing such a key centerpiece of their defense. So whether they're thinking we want to line him up here and we want to move him here, okay, on this certain blitz package, we want Haason Reddick doing these things versus that things. They can't really simulate that stuff right now. They can maybe say, hey, Will McDonald, you're going to pretend to be Haason Reddick on this play in practice, but it's really tough to simulate and get an idea of how you're going to game plan with this player in your lineup when he's not on the practice field. So not only do I think you make a good point in bringing up that he might be rusty and not fully conditioned, I think the coaching staff might be struggling at the start of the regular season to piece in where exactly they want him and how they want to utilize him versus balancing his snaps with some of the other guys on the roster because he hasn't been here throughout the entire summer.
Absolutely. The second half of the show, we're going to be getting into previewing both the New York Jets and New York Giants second preseason game, as well as getting into some of the storylines from the Jets joint practice that is still currently going on. down in Carolina. But before we do that, you rock one, I think, has the question of the show. Anthony, I'm going to let you hit it first. Why they call New York team is the stadium is in New Jersey?
All right. People say this all the time. The stadium is in New Jersey. The stadium is literally across a New York bridge and then immediately in New Jersey. It is as close to New York City as you can be. It's like closer to New York City than some parts of Long Island. It's basically part of New York City. I think it's so ridiculous when people say this. They're the New Jersey Giants. You cannot fit an entire football stadium in the middle of that city. It is physically impossible. So obviously you have to find somewhere else to place it. And it can't go on Long Island either because it is literally a Long Island. It has to go on New Jersey. And they still represent New York. They still represent New Jersey as well. And hell, they even represent Connecticut. That's the whole point. These teams represent the tri-state area. That's what makes them so special and so important to not only the sport, but to the game of football itself. So I can't stand when people say this. They are the New York teams. They're more New York teams than the one that plays in New York and Buffalo.
This is true because anything above the Bronx is upstate New York in my mind, which is just totally different element. Like Buffalo is what 8 hours away from the heart in New York City. It's just so bizarre. And the Buffalo Bills play in Orchard Park, which Orchard Park is farther away from Buffalo than East Rutherford is from New York City. So like it's all just stupid semantics. Honestly, it's so annoying.
The Chiefs don't play in Kansas City. The Dolphins do not play in Miami. They play in Hollywood, Florida. It's the same thing. I don't know. I don't know why the Giants and Jets get singled out for this and other teams get a pass, but I honestly just don't get it because like you just said, it's about a 30-minute train ride from the stadium into the city. Meanwhile, for Buffalo Bills, you got to go way further to actually get to Buffalo. So
yeah, so I'm with you. I'm glad that was the take here. But anyway, let's get back to it. New York Giants time. They are taking on the Houston Texans in the second preseason game. One, I guess we'll start here. Like, what are you looking for out of this game?
I'm looking to see the starters play. I'm looking to see Daniel Jones get on the football field the same way that so many of the other best quarterbacks in the NFL did. Mahomes, Allen, Stroud, they all played last week. I don't want to rehash this rant that I went on Monday, but I'm still peeved that he didn't play in last Thursday's game. He better get significant playing time this upcoming Saturday. And I'm not talking one drive, two drives. I want Daniel Jones to play the whole first quarter. Maybe that's a hot take. Maybe that's irresponsible. I don't care. I don't think that he has earned enough of a privilege to not play significant time in the preseason and knock off this rust, considering he has not played live action football in a game setting since November. So that's the number one thing I'm looking for. I want to see Daniel Jones play. I hope to see him play well and instill at least a sliver of confidence in me going into the season. Though obviously I have my doubts about that, but I want to see the starting offensive line as well, the defense, see how it all takes shape, see who's playing where. And hopefully Malik Neighbors is able to get out there and play as well with Daniel Jones, though that's still in question just because he did have some sort of an ailment to his foot during practice at the beginning of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw, but I clipped your Daniel Jones rant, and I think some of your Fireside Giants viewers have made their way over to Big Apple Blitz's YouTube channel.
Dear.
The comment section, you're not allowed to be excited when Daniel Jones, not if, but when Daniel Jones is good this year. So it's tough. You're taking some bullets, I think, a little bit there in the comments, but I think your point is a valid one that you could kind of evaluate a little bit this starting offense here, and hopefully Malik Neighbors is a part of that. He's the one guy, like, I don't know if I would necessarily rush him to play in this game. Like if they end up saying, you know what, we're going to hold Neighbors out, I don't think that's the worst idea.
I don't think it is either. And we kind of had a debate last night. I did a live stream on Fireside Giants talking about Malik Neighbors. A couple of the people on the panel with me said that they don't want him to play and that they want him bubble wrapped for the start of the regular season. And my counterpoint was he is a rookie. And while he's more pro ready than most rookies and he doesn't necessarily need the snaps, I do think from a locker room perspective and a seniority perspective, because he's a rookie, he should be playing just because there's going to be players out there on Saturday night, like Dexter Lawrence might play. He's obviously earned the right to rest and he doesn't need preseason snaps. But the fact that he's going to play means, well, the rookie Malik Neighbors, as important as he is to the team, he should play as well. He's not any better than, like, say, a Dexter Lawrence. He doesn't deserve a day off if Dexter Lawrence isn't getting a day off. So that was kind of the argument that I was making. I think he needs to go out there. He needs to play just because he is a rookie. And at the end of the day, it's more of a thing based on principle. But, you don't want to see him get hurt. So if Neighbors isn't at 100% strength, you probably don't play him. If he's at even 80% strength, you just save him for the regular season. He doesn't need to go out there and risk an injury. But I think it's going to be interesting to see if he does end up playing. If not, I think we'll see a lot of Jalen Hyatt. I do think it's a battle between him and Darius Slayton to see who will get more regular season snaps. And I think that's, again, probably something that gets sorted out even more over these next 2 weeks as they compete during the preseason.
Yeah, well, on the conversation of injuries and the preseason, this kind of sparked a thought for me on something we haven't touched on yet: the Tyrone Tracy injury. And you walk me through the emotions of when you first see the news on the non-contact injury, and then, all things considered, getting relatively good news on the update on the injury after we found out what it was.
Yeah, so immediately when it happened, I was doom and gloom like the rest of the Giants fans. I thought it was over for Tyrone Tracy. I thought he was going to be done for the year because that's the way they made it seem. They said his leg buckled. He immediately went to a surgery hospital, and it just looked really bad. Somehow it's a low ankle sprain, and he's probably good to go at the start of the regular season, which is better than the best case scenario when you first initially saw that injury. So I'm really happy about that. I think Tyrone Tracy looked so solid in the couple drives that he got in the first preseason game. And I'm really expecting him to play a big role in the offense this year, not only as that receiving running back that we were discussing throughout the summer, but I thought in that first preseason game, he ran really well between the tackles. And that's what really stood out to me and surprised me and told me maybe he does end up taking starting snaps before the end of the season as a rookie from Devin Singletary. So I have really high hopes for Tyrone Tracy. I'm so grateful for the fact that he's healthy and he escaped that injury, and it's nothing that's going to end his rookie season. So really excited to see him out during the regular season. He'll be bubble wrapped until then for sure as he recovers from this ankle ailment. But then seeing these other guys, Dante Miller, who we talked about, Eric Gray, let's see if they can kind of build on those performances that they had in the first preseason game and continue to push forward and really start to develop a nice Giants backfield here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for full transparency for the listener, I was sitting at Jets camp watching practice on Tuesday when I saw the news on Twitter and immediately texted Anthony. I was like, shit, man, like, that really sucks because, we just talked about him the day before and how he was such a standout in week one. And that was someone that I was really looking forward to seeing, not only in this next upcoming preseason game, but like seeing what his role would be. And just really happy that he is, not going to miss the entirety of his rookie year. But as you do point out, and rightfully so, opens up an opportunity a little bit now for Eric Gray and Dante Miller this week.
Yeah, big opportunity for Eric Gray in particular. Again, we discussed him as being someone who might end up getting cut at the end of the preseason unless he really plays well. And he really played well in that first game. Maybe he plays well again in the second and starts to carve out a role for himself. He looked really good. I think a lot of us are forgetting how good he was during his time at Oklahoma in college. So a pretty decent player there. And then what else am I looking for in this preseason game, though? I think on the defensive end, I really need to keep a close eye on this secondary. Again, the Giants cut Jalen Mills, veteran safety. He didn't play at all this summer because he was dealing with a calf injury. They seem to be bullish on their safety group, but it's really at cornerback too. And we've been discussing that since the spring. We thought that they might go ahead and target a cornerback to play on the outside in the draft. It just didn't happen. They haven't established a starter there. Who will it be? Is it going to be Nick McLeod, Trey Hawkins, Cordell Fly? I don't know. But I think that if one of those three players goes out there in the first quarter against the Texans starting wide receivers and turns in a really solid couple of drives, they'll probably be the new leader in the clubhouse. I think that's really going to be the number one thing I'm paying attention to. I see you rock number one in the chat is a Texans fan. Well, I think in this game, Texans versus Giants, definitely keep a close eye on the wide receiver cornerback battle. Giants have something really interesting going on in their secondary right now.
Yeah, and going up against a really good wide receiver core, by the way, because the Texans, they did play, like CJ Stroud played in the first preseason game. So That was something you noted in that epic Daniel Jones rant that CJ Stroud was playing, and Daniel Jones didn't play in week 1. But it's a good test for this Giants cornerback room. We obviously know Deonte Banks is a very good starting outside corner. It's still up in the air who's going to be starting opposite of him. Right now on the depth chart, it looks like Cordell Flott is in that spot, but by no means has he locked that one down just yet.
Yeah, Cordell Flott's been dealing with an injury, which is unfortunately a trend for him. He's often injured and he does not stay on the football field. So that's one of the reasons I felt like we couldn't rely on him going into the season as a starter. And considering he suffered a preseason injury and now you have other players who are stepping into a spot, I think one of them is going to take that starting job. I never felt completely confident in Cordell Flott. He's been a slot cornerback throughout his career. The fact that they decided he was going to be the CB2 was surprising. I think that job is open for the taking. I think that absolutely the Nick McLeod and Trey Hawkins duo is going to be the battle to watch for the rest of the preseason. I think one of those two is going to take the starting job unless they go ahead and sign a veteran.
Another phenomenal question here from you, Rock, that I'm going to make Anthony answer because I don't know the answer, but I think Anthony will know this answer. Who's a better team this year, the Jets or the Giants?
The New York team.
Okay. That's great. I won't make you say it.
Yeah.
Just giving you the business here. Let's get over to the New York Jets, who, as we mentioned, are down in Carolina. The joint practice today. Well, let's start there. Let's start with the joint practice and then get into this actual game upcoming. But very testy practice. There are a couple fights. Apparently, I forget. I'm gonna have to go back and look. A Panthers wide receiver caught a touchdown pass over DJ Reed and then threw the ball off of DJ Reed, and then a big fight broke out after that. And DJ Reed threw the ball back. It just very, very chippy practice between both sides there. But honestly, wasn't, and not that I'm there in attendance for it, but just following along on socials, wasn't overly impressed by the Jets practice today. Panthers are probably the worst team in the NFL, and Rodgers got picked a couple times. One of the times, ball went off Allen Lazard's hands. Jets defense was okay. They did let Bryce Young go on a couple nice drives down the field and gave up some big chunk plays. So I was kind of hoping that the Jets would go into this practice and dominate like what they did last week against Washington. And also a big reason for that hope is because a year ago, when the Jets went down to play the Panthers in the preseason, we saw the offensive line really, really struggle. And that was the Hard Knocks episode where we got Robert Saleh ripping into the Jets offensive line because of how poorly they practiced in that. And the offensive line ended up being a big issue for the Jets last year. Now, they did make a ton of changes. I think the offensive line's improved, but I was kind of hoping for the Jets to go down there and right the wrong a little bit from the last year. But I wouldn't say that they went down and dominated. It was kind of just some good moments, some not so great moments, overall kind of a rocky practice.
Yeah, well, I'll highlight the one clip that I saw you post on your Twitter today of Olu Fashanu or Fashanu. Jets fans know how to say it better than I do, but I saw that clip and that was pretty awesome and does give you some hope and excitement. I don't know if you want to pull that one up, but that's definitely a reason for optimism when you've got your first round rookie looking the part. But obviously, like you said, an underwhelming practice there in Carolina. And I will say, though, to the point of the Panthers being the worst team in the NFL, yeah, this is a great rep from Olu. I think that he's just going to be an absolute stud. I loved that selection.
At right tackle. Sorry to cut you off, but at right tackle, too, by the way. They've been working him at right tackle this week after having him exclusively on the left side to start camp. Yeah,
and I think that's good because the bookends for the Jets this year are going to be Tyrone Smith and Morgan Moses, both of which are veterans who are, I guess, vulnerable to injuries, if you want to call it that way. So having Olu ready to go on either side, if either one of them has an injury, I think that's important. Just get him in there in the starting lineup in one way or another by the season's end. But I will say this to the credit of the Panthers, and I know it's kind of tough to credit the Panthers, but yes, going into this year, worst team in the NFL on paper. They've been having a lot of really solid practices, though, throughout the summer. Like, a lot of their players have looked like they've made significant steps forward. I've seen Jonathan Mingo take steps forward. Xavier Legette looks like a stud, that rookie that I was really high on going into the draft. Bryce Young has looked like a much better player throughout practice. And again, it's practice, so who knows? But I will say, to that point, the Panthers maybe not as awful as a team as they were last year. And so for that reason, the Jets, obviously you expect them to be much better and outperform them during all of those practices. But I do think that, you could kind of give some credit to the Panthers for showing signs of progress as well.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And I don't know, maybe it's just kind of more recency bias for me where it's like Brian Burns gets traded to the Giants and you're like, there's not a lot of big names there. But you're right. They are a young team that is coming off a really tough season, and Bryce Young. It'd be good for him to look a little bit better this year as well. It was Terrace Marshall, by the way, the receiver who caught the touchdown pass and then threw the ball off of DJ Reed. So that really kind of started the scrap today, and we'll see if any of that carries over to the preseason game. Usually not, because it's not usually any of the regulars. But for me in this game, it's someone that we mentioned here and someone who I put on the graphic, Olu Fashanu. I would imagine that he's going to play on the right side this week, just because that's where he's practiced all week. And I thought he looked really good in the Jets' first preseason game against Washington at left tackle. 14 pass pro snaps, no pressures allowed in practice this week. And in this joint practice, we saw a good rep from him on the right side. He's been just as solid there. And I think that has to make you feel confident about your first round draft selection. And that's who I'm keeping a close eye on, because unlike the Giants, Jets won't be playing their starters in this one.
Yeah, definitely keeping an eye on him and definitely feeling, positive over the way that he's played. Looking at the PFF grade, his pass blocking grade was the top on the team last week across 25 snaps. Like you said, 12 total pass blocking snaps. But at left tackle, let's see what he does at right tackle as well. And I think that it's awesome to see him get out of the gates hot and like already start playing well, because we've seen so many times rookie offensive tackles have such a steep learning curve. And even if they are highly touted prospects, like Olu coming out of Penn State, everyone said this guy is an elite pass protector. He should be day one really good in that regard. We've heard that before, though. I mean, believe me, I've heard it with Evan Neal. And sometimes these players don't pan out, or it just takes them a long time to pan out. Even Andrew Thomas really wasn't a great player until year 3 of his career, I would argue. So for Olu to kind of just step into the situation where he doesn't need to be an immediately great player, the pressure isn't on him because of the way that the Jets have set up this roster with Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. The fact that he doesn't need to be excellent from day one, I think, is reassuring, but also the fact that he's been excellent from day one is equally reassuring. So I think you have to be really happy about everything that you've seen from the Jets' first round pick.
Absolutely. On the defensive side of the ball, for me, things that I'm really looking for, again, sticking with a first rounder here, Will McDonald, especially with no Haason Reddick in camp, he's going to have a microscope on him. I thought there were a couple okay moments. He did get hit with the roughing the passer in the first game against Washington. So for me, kind of want to see his follow-up performance here in game 2. And see if he does end up maybe earning a spot with that starting defense. The Jets rotate their defensive line so much, so even if he's not technically a starter, he'll have an increased role than what he did a year ago. But kind of just seeing how far along Will McDonald is. And we have a spin move from practice today that we could show off. I'll pull up while you're talking here.
Yeah, I think that's becoming his new favorite move. And even on that roughing the passer, really nice spin move that he put on the offensive lineman. And even though I said, Panthers looking like a better team, looking like in practice they've been performing well, I did say those things. Their offensive line is still obviously a major point of concern, and it's a very bad unit. So you do hope to see Will McDonald be productive as a pass rusher during these practices, and hopefully in this upcoming preseason game, he continues that. He's going up against a bad offensive line. I want to see him get in the face of the quarterback and make some plays. I think that's going to be really important to see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I do think it would be really nice to see him stand out a little bit against, again, frankly, some lesser competition. I think, if he's going up against twos and on a team that's not expected to be very good this year, well, he's got to stand out in that opportunity here. So I'm keeping a close eye on the first round picks. Aaron Rodgers said in a comment this week as well, by the way, that he doesn't see the value of playing in the preseason, and instead talked about how it could be an opportunity for the younger guys who are fighting for roster spots. So even next week, which should be a really big week for us here on Big Apple Blitz, as the Jets and Giants get set to play. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll see the Aaron Rodgers at least going up against the Giants, and maybe not a whole lot of Jets starters either going up against the Giants.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because I would have loved to see the continuation of the beef between Rodgers and the Giants defense, as we saw in last preseason. That was a pretty fun moment. Obviously, Isaiah Simmons was involved with that. He's still with the team. Jihad Ward was involved. He's no longer with the team. But I would have liked to see them get a little scrappy once again, but probably during those joint practices, because I believe the Jets and Giants are going to have at least one joint practice before that game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're going to have some joint practices and then the game. And obviously, like you said, that's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of storylines there. And that's the final preseason game. And then after that, we're talking cuts. So once we get into that one, we are really trying to figure out who is going where on this depth chart and on this final roster. So these next two preseason games, very crucial for both teams. And it should be a lot of fun, especially here on the channel.
Absolutely. Lots going on this YouTube channel. So if you're new here, please make sure to subscribe to the channel here on Big Apple Blitz. We'll be back on Monday recapping both preseason games for the Jets and Giants, coming away with any storylines that we have in addition. And who knows, maybe fingers crossed, Haason Reddick contract. What are we going to get one for Monday, or are we still talking about this holdout here on Monday's show? What are we thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking we might even be reacting to a trade. Who knows?
Oh, okay. We'll do this Red John comment for you. Get some Giants positivity in here. I picked fourth in my 12-team fantasy league, thinking about taking Neighbors with my second pick. What do you think? Any advice for our guy Red John here?
I mean, this is coming from the guy who, in a massive NFL Sim 20-man dynasty league with IDPs, I traded first round, a second round, and Mike Evans to move up and take Neighbors in my rookie draft. So, yeah, I'm all in on Malik Neighbors. I'm banking on him. I think he's an auto lock for 1,000 receiving yards and then some. So I would absolutely go ahead and take him.
I agree. I think he is going to be the focal point for Daniel Jones, maybe Drew Lock, and maybe Tommy DeVito as well at some point this year. Guys, that's going to do it for us. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can find Anthony over on Fireside Giants. Me, I'm on Talking Jets, and Matt O'Leary, NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony. And we'll catch you next time.